At 2:17 p.m. local time, just off Venezuela's northern coast, a small radar contact flickers across the USS Mason's combat display. A go-fast boat, low, narrow, and fast, tears across the Caribbean Sea like it's late for its own funeral. For the next 6 minutes, that tiny speck is about to pull the dumbest move imaginable, charging straight for a U.S. Navy destroyer. The Mason, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, isn't built for chasing smugglers. It's built for war. But out here, south of Puerto Rico and just beyond that, Venezuelan waters, its radar sees everything, especially trouble moving at 45 knots. Contact bearing 180, range 10 miles, speed increasing. The voice from the Combat Information Center is calm, but nobody's breathing easy. The go-fast boat isn't responding to any warnings. Not in English, not in Spanish, not to the internationally recognized Maritime Distress Channel. Just full throttle right towards one of the most heavily armed ships afloat. Through binoculars, the crew can see 4 figures on board. No flags, no markings. One man near the stern appears to be handling something metallic, tube-shaped, and way too long to be a fishing rod. Then it happens, a sudden flash. From the Mason's deck cameras, it looks like a launch. White smoke, then an explosion that rips through the go-fast's hull. The entire vessel erupts in fire and vanishes behind a wall of seawater. For a moment, everyone on the bridge thinks that they've just been attacked. But within seconds, that theory collapses. The blast came from inside the drug boat. The Mason holds course, the flames die out, the wreckage drifts. And as the smoke clears, one question cuts through the silence. Did the U.S. Navy just intercept a threat or destroy the wrong boat? By 2:24 p.m., the USS Mason is holding position, engines idling low. The radar track that once showed a bright, fast-moving contact is now a cluster of debris fields, cooling metal and drifting fuel slicks. What started as a routine intercept has just turned into a political nightmare in the making. From the Combat Information Center, operators replay the radar footage in slow motion. The contact, labeled Track Sierra 041, never fired a shot. The flash that triggered the explosion seems to have originated from inside the vessel's cargo bay. A malfunction? Or something more volatile, like contraband that wasn't supposed to ignite? Either way, it's bad. Because less than 2 hours earlier, the Mason had received a clear directive from U.S. Southern Command: intercept suspected narco vessels operating east of Los Monjes. That instruction was part of Operation Marlin Shield, a U.S. anti-trafficking campaign targeting go-fast boats and semi-submersibles ferrying cocaine toward the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. According to Reuters, Pentagon officials later described the strike as a lawful action against a hostile vessel linked to narco-terrorism. But at the time of contact, there was no verified ID. Just radar, thermal signatures, and suspicion. The Mason's surface search radar, the AN-SPS-73, had first picked up the target at 2:11 p.m., 8 nautical miles out, hugging the edge of Venezuelan waters. The contact didn't respond to any hails. That alone was a violation of international navigation safety. Standard procedure followed. Step 1, hail the vessel. Step 2, attempt visual identification via long-range cameras. Step 3, deploy warning broadcast on maritime channels. When all 3 failed, the Mason's bridge switched to posture protocol, arming its 25mm autocannon and activating its FLIR, the forward-looking infrared camera, to get eyes on the deck. Through the thermal feed, they could see it clearly now. 4 people on board, minimal gear, no national markings, and what looked like long cylindrical packages stacked near the stern. The kind of profile that the U.S. Navy intelligence teams have come to associate with high-value narcotic shipments. Then came the curveball. The suspect vessel suddenly altered course directly toward the Mason. "Bearing steady, CPA under 500 yards, one operator called out. "That's way too close for a smuggler trying to run." At 2:21 p.m., the Mason broadcast one final warning in Spanish. "Unknown vessel, you are entering a U.S. Navy exclusion area. Have to and prepare for inspection." Silence. No signal lights, no reduction in speed. Just the sharp hum of twin outboard engines maxed out and aimed dead on at an American destroyer. Inside the bridge, every sailor's eyes were fixed on that radar screen. "What's the plan if they ram?" one asked. The captain's answer was simple. "We don't assume, we verify." The MH-60R Seahawk, call sign Romeo 21, lifted from the aft deck within seconds. Its camera locked on the go fast from 300 feet up. From that angle, you could see the sheer recklessness of the approach. The vessel's bow bouncing in heavy surf, no evasive movement, no signal flags. And then, the flash. Caught in perfect detail by the Seahawk's infrared feed. A burst of light from the aft section of the boat, followed by total disintegration. The helicopter's crew circled twice, confirming debris. No hostile fire detected, no outgoing rounds, no secondary detonations. This wasn't an attack, it was a detonation. Within an hour, U.S. defense officials briefed reporters, calling it a precision strike on a narco-terrorist vessel, even though the footage clearly showed no engagement from the Mason. Later that night, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed 4 fatalities and described the event as part of an expanding maritime campaign to disrupt transnational criminal networks. But among the crew of the Mason, nobody was celebrating, because every sailor on that ship knew the truth. That explosion didn't come from a missile or a cannon. It came from whatever that boat was carrying. And that meant one of two things. Either the Navy just stopped a lethal shipment, or someone had blown up the wrong target. By 3:02 p.m., the USS Mason's deck is alive with noise. Rotors thumping, radios crackling, sailors rushing to their stations. The go-fast boat is gone, reduced to burning debris drifting through the surf, but procedure doesn't stop with an explosion. Every second after contact matters just as much as the strike itself. The Mason's MH-60R Seahawk Romeo 21 banks low over the wreckage, its optical pod scanning the water. What the crew sees is grim. Shredded fiberglass, scorched metal, and 4 life jackets, none inflated. The pilot reports it back to the ship. No survivors visible, possible fuel fire still active. Inside the Mason's Combat Information Center, operators tag every piece of floating debris on the radar. Each is photographed, logged, and then sent to Fleet Command through the Navy's Cooperative Engagement Capability Network. Within minutes, analysts in Florida are watching the same live footage. And the Pentagon wants answers fast. The first official Pentagon statement released via Reuters claims that the target was carrying narcotics and explosive materials linked to regional trafficking operations. But, according to the Mason's own sensor logs, no contraband was ever confirmed before the explosion. In plain terms, the Navy had eyes, but no evidence. The Seahawk continues its orbit, the FLIR camera panning across the oil-slicked surface. Suddenly, a faint orange glow appears near the stern section. The pilot zooms in. There's a sealed metal drum still intact, floating upright. It's marked with stenciled black letters, PDVSA, the abbreviation for Petróleos de Venezuela, a state-owned oil company. That's when things take a darker turn. If the cargo wasn't drugs, but fuel or industrial chemicals, the explosion might have been triggered by the crew themselves or by the impact of a tracer round, a spark, or even an engine fault. By nightfall, this incident is global news. Cable networks replay grainy footage of the explosion captured by the Seahawks camera. The Pentagon releases a 20-second clip labeled Vessel Neutralization, Caribbean Sector. The problem? The explosion looks nothing like a missile impact. There's no projectile streak, no splash signature, just a single internal detonation followed by the boat disintegrating. That's when the critics start asking the hard questions. Was the boat carrying improvised explosives? Or was it a civilian fuel runner caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Satellite imagery from Planet Labs, analyzed by the U.S. Washington Post, shows no evidence of naval gunfire in the area, but confirms the presence of U.S. ships conducting counter-narcotics patrols less than 18 miles from the Venezuelan territorial water. By 8:40 p.m., Venezuela's Ministry of Defense issues a televised statement accusing the United States of an unprovoked and illegal attack on a civilian vessel operating in Venezuelan-administered waters. They call it an act of piracy. In Washington, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth takes the opposite tone. Standing at the Pentagon podium, he declares, "The U.S. Navy acted lawfully to protect its forces and partners from a hostile narco-terrorist vessel. 4 enemy combatants were neutralized." Except the word enemy doesn't sit right with everyone. Because as Reuters notes, no formal identification was made. The victims' identities remain unknown. Back on the Mason, sailors replay the thermal footage for the 10th time. One pause frame shows a clear image. A man standing near the stern, waving both arms seconds before the blast. An international distress signal. If that's true, that changes everything. The ship logs record it clinically. Contact Sierra 0401 destroyed by internal explosion. No hostile fire observed. Investigation pending. But in private, among the crew, a different story circulates. One they'll never say on record. That boat wasn't attacking. It was asking for help. And the U.S. Navy just turned it into the biggest diplomatic mess in the Caribbean since 1989. By the next morning, October 4th, 2025, the blast off Venezuela's coast had already evolved from a tactical incident into a diplomatic crisis. The U.S. Navy calls it a successful anti-narcotic strike. Caracas calls it murder. At 9:10 a.m., Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro appears on state television standing in front of a Venezuelan Navy patrol vessel. His message is simple and furious. The United States has violated our sovereignty and killed Venezuelan civilians in cold blood. Within hours, Venezuela declares a state of maritime emergency, deploying coastal patrols and fighter jets along the Paraguana Peninsula. State media broadcasts footage of sailors loading weapons and raising the national flag over docked ships. Meanwhile, in Washington, the Pentagon doubles down. According to AP News, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth insists that the target was positively identified as a narco-terrorist vessel engaged in hostile maneuvering. He adds that the explosion occurred during a lawful defensive action. That phrase right there, lawful defensive action, is key. Because under international law, specifically the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, a Navy ship may only use lethal force in international waters if it's under imminent threat. But video evidence shows no oncoming fire, no evasive maneuvers, and no warning shots. So was there a threat at all? According to Reuters, anonymous officials inside U.S. Southern Command admit sensor data remains inconclusive about the cause of the blast. They hint that a secondary chemical detonation may have occurred inside the target vessel, meaning it might have blown itself up accidentally. But for Venezuela, well, the damage is already done. At 2 p.m., Caracas files a formal protest through the United Nations calling the strike a deliberate act of aggression and a violation of maritime sovereignty. The Venezuelan ambassador to the UN, Samuel Moncada, delivers a scathing speech accusing Washington of using the war on drugs as a smokescreen for political intimidation. And he might not be entirely wrong. Over the last 6 months, the U.S. has quietly expanded Operation Marlin's Shield, authorizing Navy destroyers, Coast Guard cutters, and even drones to engage hostile vessels suspected of narco-trafficking across the Caribbean. On paper, it's counter-narcotics. In practice, it's a show of force. As Time magazine notes, this was the 4th lethal strike in 5 weeks, all in roughly the same area. International waters just outside Venezuela's claimed maritime zone. The goal? To disrupt trafficking routes supposedly protected by corrupt Venezuelan officials. Even some allies are growing nervous. The European Union's External Action Service releases a cautious statement urging restraint, while Brazil calls for de-escalation and transparency. But there's a bigger question: political timing. The strike comes just days after Washington imposed new sanctions on Venezuelan state oil company PDVSA. And remember that metal drum marked PDVSA recovered from the debris? Venezuelan officials now claim it was carrying fuel for civilian fishermen, a claim the Pentagon refuses to confirm or deny. So while the U.S. insists it hit a narco vessel, Caracas insists America bombed a fuel supply boat. Behind closed doors, Pentagon legal advisors are already reviewing the rules of engagement used that day. If the Mason sensors never confirmed hostile intent, the operation may have technically violated U.S. Navy doctrine itself. And for the sailors aboard the Mason, that distinction matters. Because every intercept from here on out will be recorded, dissected, and used to judge whether the U.S. Navy can still claim moral authority in these waters. The sea might forget quickly. The headlines won't. By the end of that week, both ships are long gone from the scene, but the waves they created, political, legal, and moral, are still rolling across the Caribbean. The Pentagon continues to insist that the strike was justified. Venezuela keeps calling it a crime. And somewhere in between those two stories lies the truth, the kind that rarely makes it into a headline. So here's what we do know. A small, fast-moving vessel exploded within sight of a U.S. destroyer. 4 people died. No verified drugs were ever recovered. And the only physical clue linking it to trafficking was a half-burned drum marked with the logo of Venezuela's own state oil company. That leaves one very uncomfortable question. Was this a successful counter-narcotics mission? Or an accident the world just watched happen in real time? Because these gray zone operations, half law enforcement, half military, are blurring lines faster than ever. The U.S. Navy is now playing cat and mouse with smugglers, militias, and sometimes even nations, all inside the same contested waters. One misread signal, one wrong assumption, and you get an international incident like this. And maybe that's the real warning buried in this story. You can't fight shadows with missiles forever. Eventually, somebody gets hit that wasn't supposed to. So what do you think? Was the U.S. right to act fast and take the theoretical shot, or should they have held their fire until they were sure what they were looking at? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like and subscribe for more real-world naval stories told straight and sharp. And hey, if you want to go a step further and support the channel directly, please join the fleet. You'll get loyalty badges, priority replies, and you'll help us bring more true maritime stories to the surface. Just click join on our channel page and get on board. And remember, if you're going to charge a U.S. Navy destroyer, you better make sure your boat doesn't explode first. I'll see you in the next one.